Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading. Bet UK is empowering the everyday wins, cheeky grins, big conversations, budding aspirations. Our goal? To make EdTech accessible and teaching exceptional. Join the global education community on the 24th to the 26th of January 2024 as we make education better together. Tick it off your Christmas list today. Get your free ticket before the 13th of December deadline. Visit www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. This is me, and this is the Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio, and we are going to be talking for the next 90 minutes about artificial intelligence in education. I've got a number of people joining me to discuss this. The reason I've sort of picked this particular topic is because it interests me. We've all seen the exponential rise in the use of artificial intelligence in the last year. So I thought this would be a timely place for us to reflect on how it's currently being used and how it might be used in the next year or two. Because so far, it's been very much ChatGPT started it, and I guess many of the apps that have come out in the last year have been, and I've got experts who will know far more than me on this, but they've been driven by that engine. So it'll be interesting to see what comes about in the next year, because if you look at the change and the pace of change in this area, it's been incredible. So it's going to be fascinating to explore that tonight, and also we're going to explore how not only how teachers are using, but how the apps they're using, the programs they're using, the techniques they're using, the scripts they're using, the prompts they're using, how they're getting the best out of it. I've got a number of panelists on with me this evening. I've got Paul Matthews with me. Paul, if you want to say hi to everybody.
Well, g'day everyone. Yes, it's Paul Matthews here. It's funny, it's the evening show over there, but I'm down here in Tasmania, which is right on the southern end of Australia. And for me, man, I've got to tell you, it's 6:30 in the morning. So it's much better that you're getting me now than in the evening, because my mind is worth about $3 in the evening. So I'm a morning person, and it's good to be here with you guys this morning.
Yeah, happy days, Paul. Thanks very much for giving up a little bit of time to talk about AI. Paul is a former teacher and very much an AI enthusiast. So that's really exciting that we've got Paul to feed into the conversation. We've also got Mark, who is an English teacher in Germany. Mark, can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah. Hopefully you can hear me as well.
Can hear you loud and clear. Thanks very much again for giving up. I'm guessing it's 8:30 p.m. in Germany now. Maybe.
It is, yeah. Lovely, yeah. Perfect time.
Yeah, brilliant. And we've also got Janine, who is a part-time teacher and also an AI enthusiast. Janine, are you with us? Oh, can't hear Janine at the moment. We'll try and get Janine in a minute, but we can't hear her at the moment. But we've definitely got Paul and Mark with us. So let's sort of kick off the conversation. And also I've got Alessandro, who will hopefully also be joining us as well. I've just invited him in as well. So we've got a number of people. And obviously, if anybody else during the course of this conversation wants to get involved, maybe something piques your interest as we talk about this, and you want to get involved, then absolutely hit the request button in the bottom left and have your say. That's what we're all about here. So we're very much about teachers having a voice, and it would be excellent to hear from as many teachers as possible in the show this evening. Just before we crack on, it would probably be a very good time for me to thank our sponsor tonight, which is John Catt Educational. If you haven't heard of John Catt.
Hi guys, if you can hear me, I'm not hearing anything from you, so I think I'm going to have to go and resettle somewhere else. It's Janine, and I'm just hearing tiny little bits of
no problem, Janine.
Speaking,
if you just
nothing much else.
No problem. If you just exit the space and then come back in, and hopefully we can sort that out. So as I was saying, a massive thanks to John Catt for supporting the show tonight. They are a book publisher, if you haven't heard of them. They provide books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. And if you want, you can get 20% off any book in John Catt by using the code JCTTR2324 when you go to your basket on the John Catt website, which is johncattbookshop.com. You can order any book on there, get 20% off courtesy of us, and happy reading over Christmas. So let's crack on with this. Paul, I'll start with you, if you wouldn't mind. And I want to ask you, Paul, just to start with, what is, for anybody who hasn't been with us for the last year, what is artificial intelligence?
That's a good question, Tom. A really good question, and one to which I guess there's many, many species of answer. So and one minor correction before we crack on, I'm still a teacher. I'm still teaching.
Okay.
I teach in a secondary school down here in Hobart, Tasmania. Hey, mate, that's just fine. It's all good. So what is AI? That's a great question. And rather than answering it technically, I think I'd answer it metaphorically. Because if we're all teachers here and we're all looking at how we can refine our practice and help our students with artificial intelligence. So to answer the question metaphorically, I'd say artificial intelligence is an assistant. You treat it like an assistant. Teachers are professionals and we need to maintain our professionalism. AI is not here to take over our job or do our job for us. I personally, when I think about AI, I treat it as someone who is freshly graduated out of uni, who I need to give very, very detailed instructions to if I'm going to get anything worthwhile out of them. But it's effectively another set of hands. It's really good at creating resources and doing the busy work of being a teacher. So not the most technical answer, Tom, but hopefully a helpful metaphor that people can get some handholds on as they conceive of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Does the definition of artificial intelligence change depending on who you ask?
Oh, most certainly. It's one of those things. There's a lot of conjecture in this space, and there's some people who say, well, look, artificial intelligence, it's not a technology, it's a social contract, it's a social construct. Other people will go along and propose their various different definitions. So there's a list of definitions as long as your arm, Tom. But the thing about it is that's why I prefer a simple metaphor. I treat artificial intelligence, whether I'm using ChatGPT or image generation software, any of the large language models, I effectively treat it as a very keen and willing, yet not that competent assistant, to which I'm giving as clear directions as I can, and which is able to help me out with the administration that often attends teaching.
Yeah, got you. Mark, I wondered, can you tell me from your perspective? Well, first of all, Mark, because I was very rude with Paul there and I completely didn't know he was still teaching. Paul, you need to add that to your Twitter bio because you don't have it on there. You don't have that you're still teaching. Put it on there. Mark, anyway, what's for you? Can you just tell me really briefly what exactly you do out there in Germany? I believe you're an English teacher, but just introduce yourself and tell us.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So I was an English and media teacher in the UK, and then I've moved out to Germany. My wife lives in Germany. So after sort of 6 or 7 years, we thought it'd be a good idea to try and reunite. And I teach here. I teach English, and I've just been given ethics as well. So that for me at this particular school is teaching both first language English students, particularly focusing on literature. So we teach Shakespeare, we teach Dickens, we teach all the normal kind of staid kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's also teaching children who are second language or potentially third language English speakers. So they may not necessarily be able to access some of the text. They have to be somewhat more modern,
Yes.
so 20th century. And for a lot of them, we have a kind of a process which is about comprehension and about production that they focus on. Whereas with the we've got L1, so first language speakers, it's much more about analysis and digging into things like context and authorial intent and so on. And that's from over here. Again, I'm in a European school rather than a German school, which are very different.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
yeah, we have like secondary 1 through secondary 7, and that's it. So that's kind of, in fact, I've taught ages between 10 and 18 in this time here. So I've been here now. This is my second year, so I've been just over a year.
Brilliant. And why are you interested in artificial intelligence, Mark? Why does it interest you in the field of education?
It's a really good question, because I think that on one hand, as a professional, you want to stay on top of all the latest kind of information and trends. But as a generally a kind of tech nerd, and someone who's interested in new and shiny things, it's just interesting. And as someone who's then found out a little bit about it, you tinker around with it on different things, and you kind of decide whether it works for you. I think the shiny new appeal of it is actually starting to lose its sheen, and I think that whilst I get Paul's enthusiasm, and I think his analogy was really good. I would say my own analogy is more like the transition in humankind from sewing by hand to sewing machines. It's, oh, that's great, that could save me a load of time. It's like, well, it could, if you are very good at it. And
yeah,
you always have to have two things, which is it relies on the skill of the human input and a very, from a rough to a clear idea of what a successful output should be. And I think with AI, what we found in both the staff room and the classroom is that the input that you put into it really relies on clarity, and really relies on you not only assuming that they're perhaps an inexperienced first jobber, but they're an actual idiot, and they have no concept of many things that you take for granted. So you do have to be very, very precise at times, but in ways that you probably didn't expect, which is almost exactly the same as teaching, when you can give a classroom what you think is a relatively straightforward task, and some of them will produce things that you have no concept of how they got there. And that, I think, is the issue with AI, is that, well, one of several issues I would have with it. But yeah, being able to be a good seamstress relies on you being able to sew by hand or sew by machine. And the same, I think, is to be a good teacher using AI. You need to assume that if it doesn't work, you could still do it yourself to a point.
Well, it's interesting because I put out a question on my Twitter a few days ago. It said, have you used AI tools? If so, how significant a difference has it made to you? And most of the comments were very, very positive, and we will explore, how you've used it and so on, but in a minute. But one of the sort of more critical themes emerging was, it took me as long to create the prompts as it did to actually get the answers. That was one criticism. And another criticism was that the answers that it gives you, as much as they look good on face value, when you actually look at the sort of finer details, for example, in the area of lesson planning, for example, some people were saying it's a bit too predictable and generic, if you like. Now, obviously, in my opinion, it's probably going to be that, isn't it? Because it's culminating information from lots of different sources and giving you an answer. I can't see how it would be. I mean, I'll ask Paul will probably know this, but it's how unique can AI be, and how much sort of creativity within it can exist. I'm sure it's going to advance in ways that we can't even imagine right now. Paul, do you have any thoughts on those two criticisms that I saw?
Sure, I do, Tom. And let me say this before I get onto that. I love what Mark said about enjoying artificial intelligence. He's into tech, he's into the modern developments and where sort of this space is going. I'd also just say, however, if you're a teacher out there and you're not into tech, and that was very much me for a long time, I wouldn't be excited about artificial intelligence because of the tech, but I would get excited about it. Not because you love tech, but because you love your students and you love your colleagues. I really do think that this technology, if wisely used, offers us huge benefits in the classroom and in the staff room. I think many of the pain points that we're facing in both of those areas can actually be remedied by artificial intelligence. And we can double click on that more later. As to the output, Tom, it's one of those classic, I mean, any maths teacher in the chat, they'll understand the idea of angle in equals angle out. So if you're getting a boring generic output, well, just between us, it's because you're putting in boring generic prompts. The angle in equals the angle out, right? So artificial intelligence, people who say, I'm getting rubbish out of there, I go, yeah, well, you probably are getting rubbish out. It's actually because you're putting rubbish in. So it takes a while to learn how to engage with these models. And to use Mark's sewing analogy, I can imagine someone who'd been stitching by hand their whole life, their first run through with a sewing machine, they go, this is rubbish. It took me 100% or 110% of the time to actually get the same thing done. And you go, yeah, well, that is true. But that's because you're right at the bad end of the learning curve. As soon as you actually get some basic AI literacy, or in that metaphor, as soon as you actually learn to work the machine competently, well, you're actually going to see that time diminish. Yes, it takes a while to write a prompt, but as teachers, we're doing the same 6 or 7 things over and over and over again. So once you've got that prompt, put it in your back pocket, it's yours, and it will serve you well.
But how do you, it's almost like what you're sort of saying there is you need to almost train yourself in using AI platforms or engines. You need to sort of, do you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah, I do.
Yeah, so
look,
I'm saying I'm saying, maybe I'm sure there will be people out there, particularly teachers, who are saying, I don't have time to sort of sit there and imagine these prompts and create these interesting prompts to give AI all the information it would need to create something good, But I think it's a really interesting point, because could you argue that at the moment, as it stands, because it's so new, the way in which it's being used is quite sort of give me a list of bullet points, create a quiz, very sort of stuff that's very helpful, but not sort of what you're getting at.
Yeah, I think most of the people who are using artificial intelligence are novices, and that's okay, because we can actually prompt it with human language and we don't have to learn code. We can actually learn fairly quickly. But this is what I would say. It does take some time to learn it, and it takes brain space as well. And you're actually going to have to sacrifice those two things for a short period of time if you want to learn how to use AI. But can I just say to every educator out there, it is absolutely worth it. It is a small sacrifice for a huge long-term gain. Again, in our jobs, Tom, we're not doing anything that is novel or new. Often we're doing the same 6 or 7 tasks over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
So that's why I'd say learn how to do those things. And I think you'll find that a little bit of time invested, it's like investing a little bit of money. You'll get some good compound interest, and you will actually end up seeing some great rewards for that investment.
Can I ask you, Paul, and I'm going to come to Mark in a minute. I'm going to ask you both, actually, starting with Mark in a minute, how you've used it, in the last, 6 months or whatever. But Paul, I want to ask you then, can you give me, if I was to say, right, either in a general sense or a more specific sense, give me an example of a bad prompt and a good prompt, but on the same thing. Like,
sure.
Do you know what I mean? Like, let's say, I'm trying to think of, imagine, I don't know how to frame it. Maybe you can come up with an example. Give me an example of a bad prompt and a good prompt, but on the same thing.
I can absolutely do that. Yeah, that's no trouble at all. Well, look, a lot of people, when they approach artificial intelligence, they don't think of it as something that they have to give very much detail to. People almost subconsciously think of it as a guess what's in my head machine. And that's their downfall. They say, they give it a bad prompt, for example, write me a lesson on the causes of World War I. Okay, so I teach Year 9 history in Australia. That's what we cover in Year 9 history. Write me a lesson on this. Now, actually, there's not a lot of texture or color or flavor to that prompt. But
Yeah.
obviously, the educator in their mind, they've been writing lesson plans. They've probably done it the same way for 15 years. So they've got a mental schema for what a lesson plan is. Of course, they haven't shared it with the AI, and they get very, very disappointed when the artificial intelligence doesn't read their mind. So instead of saying, okay, write me a lesson plan, and then throwing our toys out of the pram and railing on AI when it doesn't read our brains, I suggest a 3-step approach to prompting. And Mark might have something more sophisticated. This is the simplest way, but I've found in a sort of 80-20 sort of idea, this will get you most of the way. I simply give the artificial intelligence a role, then I give it a task, and then I give it a format. So the role, I might say, you will often start that by saying act as. So I might prime the artificial intelligence by going, I want you to act as a Year 9 history teacher. All right.
Okay.
It's trained to do any number of a billion different things. So we need to get it in the right headspace. I'd say, and this would all be in one prompt role: act as a Year 9 history teacher. Task: write me a lesson plan investigating 3 key causes of World War I. And format: how do I want that? I might say I want a bullet point, and I want it in the 5 E's lesson plan, or I want it in the 5-minute lesson plan structure. Or I'm actually giving it the structure that I want. So if you can give it a role, a task, and a format, you are going to be streets ahead of where you would have been, and you're actually not asking it just to read your mind.
Does it, when you give it the role, does it, that's an interesting one, because that's not something I've done up to this point. So, why does that help? I mean, surely the AI would, if you said if you started with create a lesson plan, does the AI not know that it's acting as a teacher just based on that?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. And the metaphor I use, I recently did some training with the Australian Boarding Schools Association, and I got them. I said, guys, I want you to write a paragraph on basketball. And they go, oh, hang on. Okay. And some people went and did it. And there was a crazy range in the results. And the fact of the matter was, people weren't sure whether they were writing a newspaper article, whether they were writing it for their class, whether they were writing a how-to guide, or whether they were trying to write a review of a game. They could have been doing anything. Because I gave them no context, I got a wide array of input with a wide array of quality. And the large language model is the same. Yes, it might clue into the fact that you're a teacher if you're asking for a lesson plan, but the more specificity, just like if I said, write me a how-to guide on basketball, you're going to write a much clearer paragraph than if I just said, write me a paragraph with an unspecified audience or an unspecified goal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Absolutely. Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. And, it's interesting just to explore that there's almost something simple about it, but it's almost so simple that you could miss it. I guess it's also the expectation we have of AI, isn't it? It's like, oh, AI, like you said, AI should be able to read what I want, or it can, but you still need to prompt it, well. Anyway, Mark, I want to ask you, Mark, how have you used AI you're an English teacher. How have you used it in the last 6 months? What have been the key successes and maybe the key things where you thought, I thought it might be able to do that and it hasn't, or bits where you've gone, ooh, that was a bit of a waste of time?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think I wanted, before everyone else kind of moves on, one of the things I thought was interesting with Paul's prompting.
Yeah, it was.
That he very nicely complimented me. I haven't got anything more sophisticated, but what I would add, and it comes to lesson planning in general, is what is the objective? So, and I know that this obviously would relate to, in the case of the basketball article, with the audience, but really being clear what you're trying to achieve. So if you're saying to the AI, for example, as I have, I am writing 20 reports for my class. I need 20 different 150 character sentences that focus on a different positive. Can you generate these for me in bullet point fashion, right? So that was a prompt I used, roughly speaking, to come up with some templates. So we create quite short reports for our students. So you have to be very conservative with your language. So I wanted to have some options, but I can put into our system these kind of templates, if you like. And then when it comes to a particular student, you do a little drop down, and it pre-populates their name and what you've put in the template, rather than having to write everything out again. Now, for some people, they might make 5 templates and think that's great, and away they go. But personally, I think that firstly, you, with that scenario, with this of report writing, you have to have space to be to personalize it to their individual needs or their successes and challenges. But you also know for a fact that the kids look at their reports and share them with each other. So if you are too prescriptive in the sense of, well, I've got 10, that's going to cause you problems. For me, what I've been doing is using these prompts to create the reports, and then going, okay, well, I feel like I've used this similarly before. Because I'm an English teacher, I should be able to use some synonyms here. So let me change some of the words up. And for me, that's been really, really successful in terms of saving time, making me really have to think about the student rather than the language. Because I know the language is fine. I just need to think about, is it the best form of that language? And so for reporting, it's been really good. And I think that there are lots of different platforms out there, and they seem, in my my kind of cursory research, they seem to be really geared towards the kind of maths focused right and wrong outputs, if you like. And even with English, if, let's say, because I'm going to be the kind of I suppose the devil's advocate here, if I was going to create a assessment or a piece of work that I would say to the students, you need to write X, Y, and Z, and I then create a mark scheme specific to that, and I have to load it into a particular platform. So, and again, I'm being very vague here because I wouldn't know which particular one of the 60 or so education AI products to choose for this. But if I had to input a schema and then mark them against it, and it generates some feedback, it's actually extraordinarily complicated, and it's probably AI isn't able to do that well yet. So I would never ever use it for assessment, for example, because it also doesn't take into account some of the things that we're taught as teachers to really think about, which is individual student scenarios. So if you've got a student who found the tasks to be pretty easy, and they didn't really try their hardest, and got a pretty, got a kind of mid-range grade, you might be quite cynical and say, well, actually, I think you could do better, and you kind of let yourself down, even though it's not bad. On the flip side, a student who got a lower grade but had worked really hard because they found it a bit of a challenge, you would use more encouraging language. And I feel like that isn't, the AI as a industry isn't really capable of doing that, because it completely relies on what's in the databases it connects the data to, and what's been put there by someone else. So I don't know if you want me to tell you the Twitter story, so I'll save that maybe for later on.
Well, go on. No, go on.
Yeah, okay. Well, at our school, students have been in the past encouraged, and now they're kind of permitted to allow to use devices in the classroom for particular tasks based on the teacher's power to decide whether they should or shouldn't. Okay, so just to paint the picture, one of my classes was tasked with, they've been studying Great Expectations, and they were tasked with writing about a theme in a kind of practice essay for their European back exams, which come up at the end of the year. The students were allowed to use the AI. We've encouraged them to use technology, so they've got a shared database of useful quotes across the different texts we've been studying, so they can all dip into that spreadsheet and use resources. Okay, so just to paint a brief picture, one of my students decided that they would use an AI platform to try and get some quotes. I said to them, that's fine. I have no problem with you using that to help you find it, rather than thumbing through the book and kind of hoping or looking through your notes to find something you might have highlighted. So I'm fine with that. But again, this goes back to the point Paul's making about the prompts. So what came back, and what I've posted on the Twitter thread, was a quote that I really didn't recognize. So I looked it up. I thought, it's just good sense to check what quotes they're using. And it didn't come from Great Expectations. It came from, I think it was A Tale of Two Cities. And I said, okay, well, that's weird. And they also haven't analyzed it very well, but fine. So then I highlighted it on their work and said, this isn't from Great Expectations. About 3 lines later, they posted they put into their essay another quote. I said, well, it's just sensible to check it. So I thought, let me check this. And the output from the AI was, when I said, where's this quote from? He said, oh, it's from Frankenstein. Oh, that's unusual. I don't remember that. Okay, well, what part of Frankenstein? And I did a bit of digging through, into a conversation, if you like, with the AI, which is quite unusual. Some of the questions I asked were things like, "Are you sure?" Because it said to me, "This is a distinctive quote said by Victor Frankenstein in chapter 24 to Captain Walton." To which I was like, "Well, I mean, I've read Frankenstein a couple of times. I'm teaching it next semester. I better know my stuff." So I went to the Gutenberg project, which is, as many of you, your listeners will know, is a great resource for open source text.
Yeah.
And I searched for that particular quote, and it doesn't exist. So I went back to the AI platform and said, "Okay, what's the next line?" I said, "Oh, it's this." So okay, well, that stacks up with the chapter I think you're talking about. Can you tell me the full text of this, chapter 24 in Frankenstein? He said, "No, I can't, because it's rights restricted, and you're not allowed to share copyright material," which obviously it's not. So I said, "Who owns the copyright?" And it said, "Oh, Frankenstein, written in 1818 by Mary Shelley, is out of copyright and therefore is free to access." I said, "Well, then therefore you can give me the whole chapter." So it said, "Fair enough." Gave me almost the whole chapter. And it stopped at a point, and I cross-referenced it with the Gutenberg project. It was correct. But I said, "Okay, I thought maybe the chapter numbering was wrong, and that's why this quote didn't show up." So I said, "Okay, well, what's the next line?" And it told me. I said, "Okay, so that was correct." And then I basically I said to it, "What was the source of this quote then? The original quote I was looking at, where did it come from?" And it told me again, it was from Frankenstein. And I said, "Okay, well, which version of Frankenstein, which edition? Because perhaps the one on the Gutenberg project isn't the same as another one." And this platform couldn't tell me with any veracity where that data came from, who had cross-referenced it, who had even input it, okay, when it had last been updated, those kind of things. And it turns out not only did this platform get the wrong quote with a quote that doesn't exist, it attributed it to a book in which the quote doesn't appear. It attributed it to the wrong chapter. When I challenged it, it gave me a completely different chapter. It was as if, and this, I'd say it was all honesty, it was as if a extraordinarily confident but completely, I don't know, unintelligent person was giving you the answers. And what's most frightening is not that, let's say, as an industry, we're leaning into technology too much and losing the art of planning lessons or what have you, or maybe the kids are becoming less intelligent because they're using AI instead of thinking for themselves. The problem we have is they're being fed false information, provably false information, that I think is a significant problem that there is no immediate solution to. And I think if anybody is encouraging kids to use this technology, which I don't see as necessarily a problem, it's similar, I think, to teaching them how to use it, how to wield a knife. Because you're saying, okay, it can be useful and it's a tool, but in the wrong hands, things go wrong. Much like Twitter, much like other social media platforms, where the wrong behavior leads to wrong outcomes.
But is that, Mark, more an exception within that? And also the other thing, and I'll ask yourself and Paul this, and also it's fantastic, I've got Alessandro, who's a primary school year 5 teacher, who's also going to be coming on. In fact, before I ask you that, massive shout out to everyone who's been listening in. We've got Mark Anderson, Scott, we've got Nathan, Paul, Ben, Peter, Stephen, Kirk, Sam, Gavin, Caleb, Jacob, Sam, and lots of other people. So thank you very much for spending a bit of time with us tonight on this absolutely fascinating conversation. But Mark, is the question part A, is that an exception? And question part B, and this is the bit where I want to ask you and Paul this, is there's lots of different platforms out there. TTR certainly doesn't promote any one platform, but to name some of the ones that were mentioned in a thread to me, you've got things like Teach Me AI, you've got Magic School AI. Paul has his own platform, which I should have mentioned in the introduction, called My Teacher Aid. There's lots of ChatGPT, obviously, ChatGPT Pro. God, there's loads. There's tons of them. Loads of these platforms, and loads of them were actually mentioned in this thread in the replies. My question is A, is the story you've just said an exception? And B, does ChatGPT or, for example, the Bing version, are those engines powering all of these apps? Is it the same AI engine? Because these new apps couldn't all create their own AI. Paul, do you want to answer that?
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading. Bet UK is empowering the everyday wins, cheeky grins, big conversations, budding aspirations. Our goal? To make EdTech accessible and teaching exceptional. Join the global education community on the 24th to the 26th of January 2024 as we make education better together. Ticket off your Christmas list today. Get your free ticket before the 13th of December deadline. Visit www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
I'll ask both. I mean, Mark, do you want to answer that? Mark or Paul?
Well, I was just going to say about being the exception, and the crazy thing is, another student in the same class had prepared at home for an exam, came in and wrote into the exam 3 quotes supposedly from Great Expectations, which one was correct, one was completely inaccurate and attributed to the wrong character, and one was from Christmas Carol. And I confronted him and said, and very much, not someone to give him a bollocking over it. It was very much let's have a discussion and figure out why you did this. And I said, look, I'll bet you I can predict, you put into this chat GPT in this scenario, you put, give me a quote about ambition by Dickens, which is essentially saying, okay, can you write something that sounds like Charles Dickens or has been written? It doesn't have any specificity to it. And I think that's what students do, is they look for shortcuts, which this is one. The easiest one being don't do your homework, right? But the easiest one, the second easiest is let someone else do it for me. And that's how they're approaching this, is I need somebody else to do it for me. And what I've found is that is the case, and teachers can quite quickly at the moment pick up when it's not their words, because they know the students, and they go, well, you would never use this word, or you don't know how to spell this word. It seems a bit of a stretch. And whilst on one hand you might say, well, that's not really supporting those kids who maybe are working really hard and have suddenly seen some improvement, and you're just going, no, this is rubbish. Or it's actually making teachers have to be even more cognizant of what they're marking, because it's so much more difficult. And I think you talked about, Tom, about the different engines relying on one another, and the data that exists in the internet has been put by people, and so a lot of that data is hidden behind paywalls or is concealed, and so all these platforms can only really access certain parts of the internet, and therefore certain parts of the truth. There is a big concern about I would say things like that. You look at the art that's generated by AI, and all you need to look at the hands, and the hands are almost always wrong in some way. Whereas if you try it with writing, that's not as difficult, because the spelling is pretty much always on point. The grammar is normally pretty good. The kind of the framework, the scaffolding is good. It's just there's no soul to it, and there's no tone of voice from that writer. So I tried myself writing a poem. And you'd throw in things like part of the prompt discussion might be things like, okay, make it more poetic. Okay, make it include it with more syllables per line. Or you might say something like, I want to see more visual imagery. And when it comes back is almost like, I don't know if you ever remember that when you're a kid, the small Lego sets you could buy that would make a car and a plane, and that was it, right? It's like that. So you go, okay, this is a functional poem. Is it actually any good? It's all right. You wouldn't use it to teach children. You wouldn't necessarily try and get it published, but it's a poem. And the fact that it's recognizably that, for some students, that's enough. And for us as teachers, we can't necessarily always accept good enough. We have to accept your best efforts. And I think, with these AI platforms, that's actually encouraging students to produce an adequate response rather than their actual authentic best response.
God, that's interesting, isn't it? Paul, can I ask you, because you said you're still teaching there, I think it's history that you're teaching there, and just in general, can you tell when something's been created by AI? Do you know what I mean?
100%. Yeah, that's easy as. It's one of the easiest things in this
Why
whole
is that
conversation.
easy? Why is that easy?
Well, it's funny because about 5 or 6 months ago, a lot of educators and commentators were running around lighting their hair on fire going, guys, our AI plagiarism detectors don't work. And they really don't work, okay? They just give you a percentage that something was likely generated by AI. I've had AI generated content that I have made, and it's come back as 0% AI generated when I use a plagiarism checker. Likewise, I've written something and tried to emulate an AI in my writing, try and make it boring, generic, etc. And it's come back as saying it's fully AI generated. So the AI plagiarism detectors don't work. Now, why is that not really a problem? It's not a problem because if you're an educator worth your salt, you actually do know your students. You know your students, you're in the classroom with them multiple times a week, you know what they're capable of, and you just need to put your thinking hat on as you're doing your marking. You go, well, look, is this actually something that I think this person could write? And you might want to use a plagiarism checker, but let me say,
I mean, is it a bit like mummy or daddy helping them with the homework in 1999? Is it a bit like that? Is that what you're saying?
It is a bit. Yeah, it's a bit like that. It just doesn't have the very fortunate side effect of actually getting you at a kitchen table with your mum or dad. You can still do this while you're lonely on your laptop. But what I would say, Tom, is that you can use a plagiarism detector if you want, if you're an educator, if you're really not sure what that's good for, and it's only good for one thing. It's good for a conversation starter. Okay, it's not the be all and end all. It's not definitive proof. What is it then? Well, it's a good conversation starter. I had one of these conversations with a student just yesterday. I said, hey, mate, look, thanks for handing in your essay. I was really happy with the work I saw you getting done in class. Just a few quick questions. I've put it in this app that tells me whether or not something's likely to be AI generated. It's come up with a pretty high score. Look, I just wondered, would you be able to perhaps, you could ask them to do a number of things. You could ask them to explain words that they've used and why they chose those words. Even something as simple, Tom, as saying, can you read that aloud for me? It's amazing. I mean, I had a very sad case, actually. It's a little bit funny, but mostly sad, where that actually brought a student to tears because they read it and they're looking at this thing going, I barely recognize you, man. Like, I've got no idea what this is. So they've obviously just ripped it straight out of ChatGPT. So it's actually something, if you suspect a student is using AI, that's something you want to not necessarily manage punitively immediately. You want to manage that relationally. So let that be a conversation you have with that student, because there are some very simple ways. Get them to write something similar. Get them to handwrite something and see if it's alike at all. Get them to read it out loud.
There could be an argument though to say that if they were smart enough, they could put into the ChatGPT, write this in the style of a 12-year-old or whatever they thought their reading age might be. And then that would be much harder then for you to see through it if, for example, it was a poem.
That's true. That can certainly be done. And that sort of takes a couple of shades of the generic nature of most output out. But again, if you know your students well, I mean, you're with them multiple times a week, you see the work that they're doing in their books. I've never, and someone might have pulled the wool over my eyes, but I have never had much issue spotting work that is radically inconsistent with the rest of the work that I see in class when it comes up in an assignment and looks AI generated. So yes, there's smart ways and dumb ways to use AI, and some of our students are even approaching smart use, which is a little bit sad because it's actually it's a tax that the unintelligent students or the students who haven't invested time in using AI pay, isn't it? If the smart students are able to use it really well, and the students who need more help academically in the first place don't have the intellectual chops to be able to use AI well, then they're the ones getting busted. I should say, and this is the last thing I'll say on this, I think there are some great upsides to getting students to use AI, but in reality, Tom, most of the time in my class, especially this year with the advent of AI, I've really encouraged people to put their laptops away. Hey, put them on the charge at the back of the room. We're going to be using pen and paper today because there is a huge issue, and we can talk about this later. John Hattie and Dylan William published a paper recently about some of the threats of artificial intelligence. One of the big threats is if you don't have solidified, crystallized skills in something, going straight to AI to do that thing is going to make you much, much worse at it. It's going to stunt your growth. Of course, as teachers, it's great to use it because we already know how to write sentences and lesson plans and all the rest of it. It's actually going to make us more effective. For our students who are still learning to do the very things they want AI to do, well, if they're leaning on AI already, they're actually going to take a pretty big haircut on their education. It's not going to be good for them.
Yeah. Yeah, really fascinating. Alessandro, welcome. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Listen, you're a primary school teacher, year 5. Tell me how you've been using AI in the last sort of 6 months, and whether you think it's significantly changed what you've done in a positive way.
I just want to say I agree with everything Mark and Paul said. I pretty much agree with everything they've been saying, like the good and the bad.
It's been fantastic, haven't we? We don't want to sort of blow their collective trumpets, but they have been very good.
Yeah, no. For me, I've used it generally quite wide ranging. I've done it for reports. I've done it for sort of generating model texts in English writing. I found that it works best, for writing to persuade. So I did some great persuasive speeches and generating great sort of models, like sort of command sentence, rhetorical questions, that sort of thing. Sort of writing non-chronological reports, just sort of generating this sort of generic sort of style model text that then I really do heavily edit and sort of go over. It's just like, I think it was Paul's, I think Mark or Paul said, the assistant. It's just a great assistant. Saved me buckets of time.
Yeah.
I think it can generate incorrect information, even when you're really going into sort of grammar. I've sort of called it out on some mistakes.
Really,
yeah, and it's made mistakes. I think, you really do have to be skilled, sort of sifting through. A lot of it can be, some of it can be incorrect and false, but just in terms of getting the legwork done. It's just been fantastic in terms of saving a lot of time. But I think Mark said, some of the writing especially is soulless and it's very predictable, and it, you do have to sort of really go through it with a fine sort of comb and sort of make it your own, which is fine by me, because I think, as long as I can get a good structure for, say, like a model text, then I can just really go through it and just make it my own. But half the work's done already. So in terms of saving time, it's just been fantastic. I've also used it for sort of putting my own sort of writing through and just sort of highlighting any grammatical errors or any effect, like, asking it, is there any sentences that are grammatically incorrect, and often I don't necessarily always agree with it, but it does sort of make me think about, sort of sentences that I could probably change or edit, or if I've used a punctuation maybe ineffectively, for instance, it would just highlight it straight away. So almost like a peer assessment. It's been quite useful as well.
No, perfect. Paul, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in on that?
Sure. Look, I just want to circle back to one of the questions you asked earlier, Tom. One of the things you said is, we know AI makes things up, and the technical term for that is hallucination. We know AI hallucinates. Is that an exception? Should we trust it? I want to circle back to that because I think it's something worth dwelling on just for a moment. If I was with you, Tom, and I said, okay, I'm really excited to be working with you, talking with you, etc. Just a quick heads up, 1 in every 10 facts I'm going to tell you are false, and I will give you absolutely no indication as to which one it is, and I will seem just as confident about everything. You wouldn't not trust 10% of what I said. You probably wouldn't trust anything of what I said. Now, I might still be onto it. I mean, 90% actually is going to be right. What are you going to do, though? You're probably going to fact check. And you're going to fact check almost everything that you're going to put significant weight on in any of your further work. And that's what I would say. That's what I say to my students. It's what I say to fellow educators. Verify everything. look, a lot of people are talking about
But
how
then
can we get students.
doesn't that then defeat the object of the sort of time-saving element of it?
No, I'm talking basically about gathering facts and data here. Okay, so we're talking about getting a quote for our essay, or we're talking about getting a list of names and dates. Okay, so if I wanted to generate a list of questions from a script that I've given it, it can do that really well, and that's going to
Yeah.
save me heaps of time. But I'm talking about research here,
Yeah.
and
Right.
a lot of people are saying, well, how can we get our students referencing ChatGPT? What are the different formats we can use? And just between us friends here, I reckon they've got rocks in their head. You do not want students referencing ChatGPT, at least as a source of information. Why not? Because it just could be wrong. I say to the students, treat it like I've told you for the last 5 years to treat Wikipedia. Yes, use it to get your bearings, but I want you to press in deeper and get peer-reviewed academic sources. Same is true for ChatGPT. Yes, it will let you get your bearings, but if there's anything in there that's worth you writing about, well, you'll find there'll be multiple attestations to that idea in many, many other places. Use ChatGPT to get a 30,000-foot view, but whenever you're going to get a fact or a quote or an idea that you're going to lean on heavily in your work, well, I'd actually like you to go elsewhere and verify that as well.
Mark, do you want to come in there? Mark?
Yeah, sorry. I hear what Paul is saying. My kind of doubt about that is the fact that, yes, that fact checking as teachers is sensible, is part of the job, and whether we like it or not, we kind of have to do it. However, I would say that the like you talked about with regards to the students, I would say they don't necessarily know how best to research, whether that's good use of time or whether that's the ability to cross-reference things. You know, you just need to see what kind of things they'll type in when you're asking them to search for something. If you've ever taught, you know, media or ICT, and they can't do that very well, and that then leads to further complexities. You have to then spend more time showing them how to do things that you take for granted, and you think, well, how are they going to learn this? Someone's got to teach them. And even you know, they go to Wikipedia a lot, which I actually really endorse, because it actually does have some transparency about where the sources are. But I would say to them all, look, if you're going to use Wikipedia, if you're going to use any of these chat platforms or AI platforms, and you're using a source, you actually have to then go to the primary source or the secondary source and check. And they have to be able to learn how to do that, especially at the higher levels. But I mean, I think for Alessandro, you know, if you were asking a year 5 pupil to, you know, justify how they got that information, that's actually asking a lot of cognitive load for them to do on top of what they've already feel like they've accomplished. And I think we're asking probably an appropriate amount for university, college level students, but asking that of teenagers, I think is really challenging. And for primary school students is probably, and again, I'm not a primary teacher, so I might be wrong on this, but I think that's really asking a lot. And I think the one point I wanted to say, whilst I'm being very quick about it, is I would ask us as teachers, if we were asked to be honest, and one of the parents said to us, "Are you using AI to write lessons? Are you use AI to write reports and so on?" Would you be happy to be honestly admitting to that? And would that make you feel like it's part of your job, or would you feel like you're admitting to cheating in some way? And I don't have an answer, but I think it's worth raising the question. Like, would you admit to using it? And if so, how would you justify it?
Very interesting. Back to Paul, and then I'll go on to Alessandro then to sort of reflect. Paul, do you want to come in on that?
Absolutely, yeah. I actually want to echo something Mark said, because I think that, you know, we got to put it in bold and underline it. Our students, and we get this wrong so often, I think. As educators, it's really worth us dwelling on the fact that our students are often much worse at using technology than we think they are. They're often much, much worse. Now, we think they're really good because they're digital natives and they grew up with iPads and they've been alive. They've never known a time without internet and never known a time without their own device, many of our students. However, they're actually really good at playing Fortnite or Roblox or watching YouTube videos. Yeah. But some of the basic ICT literacy. Oh, this is how to save a document in a folder and how to organize a folder. This is how to keep a list of bookmarks in my browser. Some of the most basic literacy, they just don't have it. So what we don't want to do is assume a level of proficiency. And what Mark said is absolutely right. We need to be careful about the demands we're placing on them. And we need to be really careful of thinking, okay, they're digital natives. They'll know their way around this. Perhaps I can learn a few things off them. Often students are using things in ways that surprise us. But really, when it comes to AI, we need to do what we do in every other area of our profession, which is teach them. I'm a huge believer in the fact that when we look back at the early 21st century, it's not going to be COVID that was a big disruptor. It's actually going to be AI. And many of our educational institutions, we're going to be looking back and going, crumbs, did we really let AI loose for a year or 2 or 3 before we started teaching students how to use it properly, before we had a designated curriculum about how to do the basic bits and pieces on an AI? It's going to be a massive disruption. And I think schools, if they haven't already, they need to be finding people who are experts in this space who can show them how to teach and train their students. Because there's never been a better time to be a student, but there's also never been a worse time to be a student. And if your school isn't careful, a student could very easily, from this point on, go through their entire learning from in my school, the high school, from grade 7 to 12, without actually intellectually engaging with the work. And that's terrifying. The path of least resistance just got a lot easier. So all that to say is we can't assume students will A, know how to use it, or B, know how to use it in a way that actually benefits them in their education.
Well, Alessandro, I'm going to ask you in a moment because you teach year 5. So my next question to you is going to be, how are your students using it? Is it making them more sort of lazy, or is it a dangerous thing that they're starting to use? Is it a danger because it's limiting their own challenge to themselves when it comes to learning? Before I ask you that, though, I'll give you a minute to think about your answer to that, Alessandro. I'm just going to give a massive shout out to our sponsor on the show tonight, which is John Catt Educational, who publish professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. They deliver everywhere. So even if you're in Vietnam, Asia, Africa, South America, it doesn't matter, because you can pick up a John Catt book. And not only that, you can get 20% off your order by using the code JCTTR2324 when you go to the checkout at johncattbookshop.com. And you can visit that website and explore their full range of titles. And of course, happy reading over Christmas. So, Alessandro, how do your students use it? And is it starting to hinder your sort of teaching in any way?
Short answer is they're not using it at all.
Oh, right. Really?
Yeah, no. So obviously, if it wasn't clear, so I'm using it as a teacher, as an assistant.
No, I know, but I thought they would be using it.
No, not
at home.
I would absolutely never. They need to learn how to write sentences independently first, I think, and that's the whole point, I think.
But are they using it at home?
I don't know. We don't. I mean, my school personally, we don't set homework, so everything is done in the classroom. Independent writing is done in the classroom. So, like, they, if they are, it's not affecting sort of their grades or their school. So, the focus for me as a primary school teacher is to teach basic grammar, to teach sentence construction, to teach them to write different types of text for different purposes and different audiences. And absolutely, I think AI would hinder that, especially at year 5 level, probably even into, well into sort of key stage 3. Because like we've all been saying, you only get out of AI what you know yourself personally and what you can put into it. If you're using AI like sort of like a tool as a child with not understanding about what exactly we do, how you're using it, I think you're going to get terrible results. And I think it will hinder children's education if they are just given free rein to use it. I think we need to be thinking about how we are assessing children. And I think it should all, if we really want to assess their writing skills, for example, we need to just stick to the traditional pen to paper sort of coursework, teach them how to reference. I absolutely would never reference anything from ChatGPT. It's
Do you have a sort of Wikipedia style approach to it a little bit? Or...
You need to go to traditional, really Google everything and look at your sources and just, traditional university style. I don't know,
Alessandro, I'm just laughing at how Google's now become like traditional. Like, oh, you'll have to go all traditional and use Google. It's quite
even Google is, you still obviously have the pitfalls.
No, I got exactly what you were saying.
Your sources and everything, because ChatGPT is just can spew absolute nonsense and just make stuff up out of thin air.
But I was going to ask you, Alessandro, from your perspective, and I'll ask the other sort of speakers as well. And by the way, everybody, we've got lots of listeners, so if anybody else wants to contribute to this, you absolutely can. All you have to do is hit the little icon in the bottom left. There's a little microphone icon. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, then you can do that by just clicking that icon. But Alessandro, I wanted to ask you, like, without directly promoting any particular app, obviously, can you sort of tell, do you use one particular app or do you use a range of apps? And, where do you go with that side of things? Do you use ChatGPT?
Yeah, I genuinely just use ChatGPT and sort of just experimented with ChatGPT. Mainly, because it's free, got my login and it's quite easy to access at school. So just ChatGPT. And just to go back to would I admit to using it? Yeah, I think I absolutely would admit to it.
To parents?
Just
for anyone joining us now, we've put a question. In fact, Nathan's behind the scenes. He can probably pin it in here. But I think the question, which was a very interesting one, would you admit to using an AI to do your planning to a parent at parents' evening, for example, or at any other time? And you're saying you would, Alessandro?
I would, because I think we're under a lot of pressure as teachers, but a lot of the staff in my school that I work at, they just won't use, they won't even entertain the idea of ChatGPT because they just don't know how to use it. So it is a skill to use ChatGPT, like Paul and Mark was saying. The skill of your prompts, the skill of your sort of how you manipulate it, how you sort of prime ChatGPT, how you then use what it's been given to you is the skill. So you can't just lazy prompts will give you rubbish answers. And then what do you do with what it produces as well is key. You have to sort of analyze that and twist that as well. It's not, the job is not finished. It's not like a magic button. It's a tool. It is a time saver. It can generate great results for you. It's just it's just another tool in the toolbox, really, for me.
Alessandro, can I ask you, what's your most common prompt that you put into ChatGPT?
Well, most common prompt. So it's so as I said, I would ask it what. So my most recent prompt was, what are features of a persuasive speech? I was writing a persuasive speech. I'd ask it, what are the features of a non-chronological report, or what should I be looking for? And then I would sort of that would sort of prime it, and I would sort of then go sort of like Paul or I think Paul said, give it a 3-stage sort of attack.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
So you prime it, and then you get some information, and then you have to address some sort of misconception or redo your prompt if it wasn't accurate enough. Once you've primed it the right way, then you can give it a more specific prompt. And generally, it has just been for producing sort of these sort of model texts that I've then been sort of heavily editing, as I said.
Yeah. We'll bring Paul in, and then Scott's called in as well. So, Paul, do you want to sort of add something to that?
Sure, yeah. One of the nuances I'd add there, Tom, and I agree with Alessandro, but one of the nuances I'd add is when I'm talking with parents, and I have talked with many parents, because as you mentioned earlier, I'm not just using AI in my practice, I'm actually building an education-specific AI for teachers. So I get a lot of questions about AI use. One of the interesting things I think you want to do, just from a simple tactical level, you want to say, all right, have you got 10 minutes to discuss this? Because a lot of parents out there are going to think that AI is for cheating and you are a cheater if you use it. And so I'm not interested in having a 30-second conversation where they leave with a massive misconception of what I'm doing with their student in the classroom.
Yeah.
A big picture view of this, I think, people are used to teachers being under-resourced and underfunded. I guarantee you, if you go to Parliament House and you hear a politician give a speech, no one is going to go up and give that politician a hard time saying, oh, I bet one of your aides, I bet one of your assistants drafted that. They're going to go, yeah, of course. I'm a very busy person. No one ever goes to a lawyer and said, oh, thanks for writing my will, but I bet you used a pro forma. You go, well, of course I use a pro forma. That's just best practice. And so people, I don't know what it is. Subconsciously, they just want to give teachers a hard time. But suddenly, if we were to have an aid, and that's why I've called my AI for Teachers my teacher aid, if we were to have an aid, people need to be educated about, actually, for many professions, it's very normal. You've got a doctor, a lawyer, you've got a politician, they have aids. And we don't doubt the veracity or authenticity of their work. So now, with the age of AI, well, actually, teachers can graduate into the cohort of professionals who get an aid as well. Just like with lawyers or politicians, anything that you put out, you have to stand behind and say, I am happy with this work. Okay? A politician isn't able to blame his staffer because his speech didn't come off right, because he's still in charge. And same with a teacher, they're still in charge. But the last thing I'll say on whether or not sort of it's ethical for teachers to use AI, and would you defend it to a parent? One of the things I would also say is, look, what do you actually want me to do, dear parent? What do you actually want me to do? Do you want me to stay up all night creating customized, bespoke resources so that I actually don't get enough sleep? And then I work on my weekends and evenings and holidays, so I'm pretty strung out by the time I get to the class. And so I don't have the mental energy or capacity to engage in a deep and meaningful way with the students. I say, actually, my job is to get your students to learn. It's not my job to create custom bespoke resources. Anything I use, whether it's from a textbook, whether it's from a resource bank, or whether I've got it from AI, or perhaps I made the whole curry from spices myself and generated it all myself by hand. No matter which one of those categories I'm getting my resources from, actually what I want you to be thinking about, parent, is my student learning? I want that to be the benchmark. Don't worry about where I'm getting my resources from. Is your student learning? Are they getting better at the things that we want them to be getting better at? Are they developing as a person? That's the metric that I think I want to be pushing parents and carers towards.
Yeah, really interesting. I'll bring Scott in. Scott, do you have any, thanks for listening, do you have any sort of thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, the thing's really interesting. Thanks for having me, Tom, and nice to speak to you again.
No worries.
So for me, it's just a lot of the time when we were working in Dubai, the big focus there in the Middle East was really around digital literacy and getting students to really understand the skills that need to be to access a lot of the work. And one of the big pushes over there was gamification. So really looking at like how to use games and development of digital literacy as a way of supporting learning. And it worked really, really effectively because the kids had the skills to be able to do it, but it was implicitly taught. And I think for us, particularly in the UK, I don't think we're there yet in terms of the level of skills that students need to actually be able to access this in a meaningful way, but also to be able to question what they are producing or being given by the AI generators. But on the other hand, I've found, in terms of supporting myself, in terms of like a sort of admin role, that in terms of SEND support and producing resources for things like supporting children with ASD or selective mutism, providing fact sheets for parents to basically say this is how to support your child best at home. It's been really invaluable for me because it's been able to draw on quite a large amount of information, collate that and put it into a format that's really, really useful. Something that might take me a couple of hours is done within a couple of minutes. Whereas at the same time, if I go, right, I'm going to try and make a lesson on this or some resources, I've found that what comes out the other end, it may be to do with the directions that I'm given in terms of AI, but it's not nuanced enough or focused enough to give like quality answers or quality information. I think it is really, really useful, but it is about using it in the way that really benefits ourselves and realising not going to do all the jobs for us.
Yeah, Scott, I don't know if you heard Paul like at the beginning. I don't know if you were there right at the beginning, but he was talking about his like 3-step approach, which I'll be honest, I don't use when I use AI. Paul, do you want to sort of remind us what that was, just really briefly? The 3 things.
Absolutely. Look, it's really simple. There are more complex ways out there, but this is the way that I use. It's the way I teach my students and I teach parents and carers to use. It's the RTF. Role, give it a role. What do you want it to do? What's it acting as? In the example I gave was act as a Year 9 history teacher. After the role, you want to give it a task. So you think, what do I actually want it to do here? And again, it could be create a lesson plan, create a quiz, differentiate a text, any of these sorts of things. And then I'd also be looking at format. So that's where you'd say, I'd like it in a table, I'd like it in a grid, I'd like it in dot points with headings, or I'd like it in a 5E's lesson planning system, or I'd like it in the 5-minute lesson plan system. So it's a role, task, format. And again, what you're doing there is just hoping that AI, you're not playing guess what's in my head with the AI. You're actually giving it a good amount of information so it can give you a good specific output.
Scott, I don't know whether, because for me, I miss a lot of that sort of priming stuff, like the giving it the role and sort of, you know, it's like give me a lesson plan on X rather than sort of giving it a role first and giving it sort of more primes. Does that make sense? But I don't know whether you do that already.
Yeah, I think in terms of the sort of the send support that we've been using, so we've been saying like I want you to write me an information sheet for parents of a child who's got ASD, giving them basically prompts or information on how to best support the child. So where I've been doing that, it's been working really quite well, and I've been coming up the other end and going, this is fantastic. Whereas where I've tried to give some prompts in terms of let's look at sort of planning a lesson or put an information sheet together, at the end I've looked at it and thought, my good God, I should have done that myself. And I think it is, like you said, I need to think a lot more about what prompts are being put in place to support the best outcomes for those sort of resources.
Paul, I'll come back to you in a minute. Mark, I want to come to you next on sort of, we're moving into the final bits now, and I'm going to ask everybody this, but what do you think the future is, Mark? And when I say the future, I mean the near future. I mean in the next year or two, potentially. And Mark, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on this in terms of where you think this is all going and how far advanced you think it's going to get in the next year or two, and how it might be used in education.
Well, I guess one of the things that I first saw with regards to AI was that when I used to work in the media and decided to become a teacher, so I was a kind of late career changer. And one of the things I did as a kind of sense check was search for what industries are most likely to get replaced by robots. And fortunately, teaching came very close to the bottom. So well, that's great. That means there's a future in it for me. Whereas what I was doing, which is sort of ad sales, was quite near the top, which proved to be quite accurate. But I think the concerns that I would have are that in the same way that, let's say, many of your listeners might be too young to remember when a teacher would wheel in a TV and a VHS player and play a video. You know, it's the end of term now. Let's watch, a Disney film or whatever. And that was fine. That was pretty harmless. But there has been stories in the past of teachers putting on the wrong video, or someone's recorded something inappropriate over the video, and they've played it, unexpectedly and got into trouble and lost their job, and there've been problems, right?
Yeah.
The same has happened with AI in journalism. I mean, I think it was the CEO of Sports Illustrated had to resign because he'd allowed essentially AI produced content to be published that no journalist had actually written. And I think it was the same in Germany. There was a writer who did an interview purportedly with Michael Schumacher, who, as many of you will know, has been suffering a sort of life-changing head injury. And it was all AI generated. And again, they lost their job because it was essentially immoral. And I think the worry I have is that there are inevitably, across the spectrum of teachers, some who are going to jump feet first into it and are going to do themselves no favors and potentially put their professional careers at risk, but equally as dangerously, direct children and pupils into thinking the wrong thing or what have you. And there's enough misconceptions out there about the world itself without making that worse. So my worry is, in the short term, there is going to be this continued blurring of the lines between fact and fiction, or as Paul quite nicely said, I think it was not hypnosis. My mind's gone blank. Sorry, the delusion or what have you. So there's this aspect where we don't know the lines of that, and we're telling that to children, and teachers are in a position of authority where children will believe whatever you say in most cases, even if you tell them something to be false. If you say it in the right way, they will take that as gospel. So we have to be very, very, very careful about that. And I do think, though, that the AI will inevitably improve, because the more people talk about it and the more content that is produced on the web, especially by us as educators, if people out here have got blogs and have got, radio shows like yourself, then that content is going into the ether, and that is where AI is finding that content. So if the input is sound, the output will be better. So there has to be guardrails to ensure that somebody, whoever is writing the code that says this can be trusted and this can't, there has to be some guardrails to say that are written by people who have, got no agenda. But then you need watchmen of some kind to say this person can be trusted to do that job. So there's so many layers of security needed to make sure we avoid what could potentially be harmless or what could potentially be particularly damaging use of the technology. And I think that because there is so much uncertainty, we know that the EU are currently convening a lot of high-level discussions about the limits to that. And I think Italy are particularly concerned. I'm not particularly sure why they are more concerned than others. I know that in Germany, there's an extremely deep-seated sensitivity about the collection of data. For those history teachers, you may well understand why. And so those issues that are nation-specific, let's say, might not be accounted for when it comes to just filling the hopper with information. So because it's such a broad issue, and it actually relates quite nicely as a microcosm of the internet as a whole, and we have to be very conscious of what we put out on the internet for both our professional careers, but also what is ethical, what is correct, what is factually provable. It is a bit of a minefield, and I feel like as teachers, our focus has to be on what is right for the student. And if what's right for the student is to say don't use it, then that's what we have to say. And if it's right for some students to say use it with caution, then fine. But we are asking professionals to make a professional judgment where they may not have the personal experience to be able to make a fair judgment, and that is asking for trouble. Asking me to diagnose a student with a learning disability is probably not going to be as effective as a Senko. And in the same way, asking me to tell you whether or not to use AI is, as someone who's dabbled in it and seen positive and negative outputs, you might as well ask anybody else to some extent, because it is so new and there is so much complexity that the experts are probably also not in the areas of education where there's comparatively little income to be made. They're probably in defense contracts or something. So again, it's a lot of uncertainty in the short term. In the long term, there's probably of those names of the platform, some of them are going to be shaken out as not being particularly good and left by the wayside. And we'll end up with some of the bigger brands. You mentioned Bing, but Google Bard as well. So those kind of bigger brands will have more robust technology, and maybe it'll be suitable for us, maybe not. We shall see. But my advice would be really test it out for yourself, proceed with caution. Ask the students to at certain age levels, obviously, to try it out and feedback on what they found, and get them even looking for problems, looking like as you would with any other kind of critical thinking, asking students to be thoughtful about how they're using it, assume it's wrong until they can prove it's correct, and then take it from there really, and not think that it's going to replace our jobs, thankfully, but be cognizant that it may be able to do some of the stuff that we find challenging. My final point, and it's a kind of rambling answer, but it isn't quite right for podcast. But my final point is, I think that there are certain things that AI will never be able to do to a way that we're happy with, which is write songs, as Nick Cave found out, to produce art, to admire a sunset, to whatever, those kind of things it can't do. And unfortunately, at the moment, AI is trying, or the manufacturers, the designers, the coders are trying to make it produce art, produce poetry, produce songs, which is pointless. And the reality is they need to direct their work into making things that we do that are repetitive and tedious into easier things. If that's, for example, creating an AI that predicts what you're going to need to put on your shopping list and filling your online Tesco cart or something. Those kind of things are actually practical benefits that will save us time in different ways and don't damage the careers of the creative industries that I think are really feeling the kind of impact of AI as much as we are.
Thank you, Mark. That was fantastic. We've got another Mark coming in, and I'll go to that Mark next, and then obviously I'll go to Paul and ask Paul about the future of AI. Maybe Scott's got some thoughts on that as well. So Mark, can you hear us okay? If you want to unmute bottom left on your screen, hopefully, maybe. Mark A. Out there? No, we can't hear. Can anyone hear Mark? I can't hear Mark. Can anyone else hear him? I don't know. Can anyone hear me?
We can still hear you, Tom.
Can anyone hear Mark?
No.
Not
on mind.
Mark, do you want to try re-entering if you can? Just try exiting and coming back if you can. Maybe come out of the X app, I should call it, and then come back in, and hopefully we can connect you up, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It'd be fantastic to hear that. Paul, do you while we're hopefully waiting for Mark to come back, do you have any thoughts on the future of AI? What I'm particularly interested in is, what will AI be able to do in the next year or two that it is not able to do now?
Yeah, look, that's a really exciting question, and unfortunately, I've actually left my crystal ball at home, Tom. So I couldn't tell you. All
Well, let's do some predictions, right?
Let me predict.
That, and what I mean by this is, I mean like open access to everybody sort of stuff. Like,
yep.
I mean stuff that anyone will be able to do, not just like a select few or whatever, right? So what will one of the things that I think is like ChatGPT Pro now, because someone mentioned it, like the paid version of ChatGPT can already do more, can't it? You can use images and all this other stuff, right? So I'm just wondering whether that will become more widespread. Maybe the use of video will become more widespread.
Yes.
Maybe the use of, I don't know whether, I mean, in my sort of weird imagination, I do sort of imagine that at some point there will be like a chip that like what was that movie? I think it had Tom Cruise on it, where you put something on the side of your head and it reads your brain. So like it's what you're thinking or what your brain's doing. Like, I know at some point that's going to happen, and then it will like attach to your head, and like then it'll be plugged into AI, which will then know what you're thinking before you even input a prompt in. So it'll be like, here's the answer to the question you've just thought of. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm being a freak there, but that's sort of where I think it might go.
Well, look, it's not even that it might go there, Tom. In some places, it has gone there. So one of my best friends has motor neuron disease, and he's now unable to speak. And one of the things he's really excited about is he has a really laborious way of communicating, where he uses his eyes to signal on an iPad. And one of the things he's seen is actually there is some research being done in the States where people are able to implant something right into the brain, and it then is able to leverage AI so they can communicate in a way that's far more frictionless than the slow, laborious process. So look, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind we get there. So let me tell you one or two ideas about where this tech might go, and then I'll tell you how I think schools can navigate it well, and then I'm going to go to my morning staff meeting. So let me start off by saying I think we're going to see some fantastic text to video. I think that's really, really going to improve. My good friend Jacob Skirker, he actually co-founded My Teacher Aid with me. He's in the chat. He's been listening the whole time. Yeah. He and I had a conversation a while back where we said, I reckon what's going to happen, not just to music, not just to text, but to movies and to TV shows, is people are going to be able to say, I like Friends, I like Seinfeld, and I like Scrubs. And there will be an AI out there that will be able to generate endless content that is the cream of the crop of all that sort of stuff. Now, do I think that's good? Is that going to lead to social cohesion and human flourishing? Probably not, but I'm almost certain we'll be there in 12 months.
Yeah.
And now when it comes to schools, Tom, one thing I would say is, and I mentioned this earlier, it's a controversial take, but I think it's absolutely right. The big disruption of the first part of the 20th century will not have been COVID when we look back through the lens of time. It will actually be artificial intelligence. Now, there are a lot of people, when it came to COVID, their schools weren't ready for distance learning. They weren't ready. They were so far behind. They didn't have an online learning management system. People were still using Teacher Chronicles. Everything was pen and paper. So what did they do to get ready for online learning? They shut everything down for 2 or 3 days. At least that's what we did in Australia. They shut everything down for 2 or 3 days and they got ready. Now, I think, again, as we look back, the sane schools, what is a sane response to AI, a proportionate response to AI? I would argue it is shutting everything down for 3 to 4 days and quickly, rapidly upskilling. Again, this is a bigger disruptor than COVID. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to actually treat it as a matter of first importance.
You want an AI
to upskill
lockdown?
our teachers.
You want an AI lockdown?
Yes, I want to at least to prepare for the AI world. The world has changed in the last 12 months. We are not teaching in the same world that we were. And if we're going to actually steward our students' education well, we need to rapidly change the way that we're thinking about teaching and thinking about our students.
Got you. Mark, hopefully we can hear you now. If you were mute, bottom left. Mark A, are you there? Maybe we're not going to be able to get Mark on. I don't know what's going on there. We'll go to what I was sort of going to touch on next was about just to sort of finish off. We've got about 10 minutes hopefully left. Mark will have one more go. Mark's come back. Mark, are you there? Unmute, bottom left.
Can you hear me, Tom?
Yes, I can.
Oh my goodness! Who'd have thought it? Someone who can use some technology, you can't actually get some easy microphones to work.
Well, listen. Before I ask you anything about AI, you're a very lucky man. Do you know why?
What's that then?
Because your publisher supports Teachers Talk Radio, which means that I can mention your upcoming book with John Catt.
It does indeed.
The EdTech Playbook.
Yes, very excited.
When is that coming out?
Unfortunately, just after Bet. So we're looking at sort of tail end of March, beginning of April.
Okay, wonderful. And will that have anything in it that relates to this discussion?
Yeah, no,
AI.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's a playbook which has got chapters on how we can think about using technology in lots of different ways, all sort of reinforced by, like, you know me, Tom. So purposeful ways of using technology rather than sort of gimmicky ways. There's a chapter on feedback, a chapter on questioning, a chapter on all manner of different things. But there is definitely a chapter on AI. I was reticent to put it in there at one point, though, because it's such a fast-paced and fast-moving thing. But if listening to the show this evening has reinforced anything, it was a right decision to have a chapter in there on AI. Yeah. Whilst it's fast-paced and fast-moving, lots of the things that people have been talking about tonight, like Mark, for example, same with Scott as well. It's been the reinforcement of this idea that it's really important that we actually go back to basics in many ways around not just digital literacy, but things like literacy, the ability to actually, write. The prompt craft is a phrase which is new in the OED, but it's something that's so important, and that ability to be able to write decent questions, to probe, and to think really carefully about your writing to get the best out of these sort of text-driven interfaces is really important. And it's also given some credence to different ways of thinking as well. We heard from Paul before about different ways of assessing students. So if a student assesses something and you have concerns and worries over whether it might be, because like Paul said, you do know your students, right? If you've got any concerns over things that the children might have created using AI, we'll have that question, talk to them about it, probe, dig deeper. And it opens up the opportunities to think about assessment in different ways, doesn't it? So, yeah, it's really, really exciting. And I could talk for another half an hour on all this stuff, but I know your time's tight, Tom. So, sorry, go on, Tom.
If I was to ask you, because you're very much on the sort of hub of technology and so on, what's your biggest excitement over it and your biggest worry over it?
My biggest excitement, right, I love technology for the opportunities that it provides, because it allows us to do things that wouldn't be possible without the technology. I think the Year 5 teacher, whose name I've unfortunately forgotten now, Alessandro, I can see him here now, Alessandro.
He's here.
Yeah. the way that he was saying about using like a guide on the side as an assistant, I think is the absolute perfect way of thinking about it, because it makes us more. It's not about taking what it gives us and just copying and pasting that lesson plan that is created for you and just ta-da. And don't get me wrong, it does save you plenty of time. But I think it was Paul who was saying before, you know, let it take you some way down the journey. Don't let it try and do all of it for you, because then it becomes a real time drain. If you're trying to get perfection out of these things, out of these tools you could be using, whether it's Bard or ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or whatever, there's many of them to choose from. But you're never going to get something that's perfect. What it will do is it'll get you 3/5 of the way down that journey and stop at 3/5 of the way down. And then take it and run with it from there. My biggest sort of worry, I worry an awful lot about safeguarding. You know, firstly, students shouldn't be using this technology in school at all, really. And if you are allowing students to use it, then at least use a safe walled garden version of it. There's a great tool out of South Africa called MindJoy, where it's sort of covered off by and again, I put my hand up. No, you know, there's no affiliation with me or anything like that. I think it's a really good tool. But the reason why we shouldn't be using things like Bard and ChatGPT and what have you is that these tools learn from what we enter into it. And so with a data protection impact assessment sort of hat on, you shouldn't be using these tools for those particular purposes. But things like MindJoy are a safe walled garden where students can interact with historical figures or I programmed some with specific sections from exam syllabuses, and they can act as like specific tutors. And this is where you can have some really interesting things. Bloom's 2 Sigma problem says the children who are tutored can achieve up to 2 grades more than their peers who aren't given extra tutoring on a one-to-one basis. Well, AI chatbots can really help with that. So there's loads and loads in there, but I do worry about teachers who don't consider things like safeguarding. Those teachers who might put students' names in it to try and get it to perform some sort of statistical analysis on exam grades or class progress or whatever it is. You know, we should always be really careful about how we. I would strongly urge all listeners, if you're going to start thinking about using these sorts of tools in this sort of a way, run it past your school's data protection officer just to make sure that it's acceptable for you to be using, you know, student data in this sort of a way with the platforms you've got access to. But you can always anonymize this stuff though, so it can be, you know, again, it can be really, really helpful. But you've got to go those extra sort of steps just to anonymize it to make sure that you're not putting, you know, sensitive data on there that you shouldn't otherwise be. So yeah, my biggest concern is about teachers using this stuff inappropriately in ways that they might not realize they shouldn't be doing, you know. But so governments have been clear. They've said AI shouldn't be used in that sort of a way. It cross-references straight back into KICSI, the Keeping Children Safe in Education document. So just be careful before you start putting personal data around your students, your pupils, or your colleagues, or your families, communities, all these sort of things onto these platforms. And I'll finish off because I'm on a roll, like toilet paper. Tom, I'm on a roll. I loved Paul's little sort of short way of going about getting good results with the read and what have you in a format. But something I found really useful, and I've got my own little framework I call the STARE framework, but I won't go on about that. I'll give it a much easier thing to do, right? So thinking about Scott, for example, who was talking about getting ready to write reports around supporting students with additional needs, or whether it was Mark in his reports and all these different things. Ask whichever tool you're using, whether it's Bard or ChatGPT, what do you need to learn from me in order to get the best result from what I'm trying to get you to do? So if I wanted to, I don't know, write a bunch of student reports for me, what do you need to know from me? Do you need to know the age of the students, what they've been studying? What give me everything, and then you feed in everything that platform needs to know in order to give you the best response. You said to me one of the things you forget that, Tom, well, you didn't say to me, but you said in the show, I forget what to actually add into the prompt in order to get the best result out of it.
Well, I use the word prime. I forget to do the prime bit, which, you know, actually from doing this tonight has made me realise that a bit more.
Yeah, so with that, Tom, if you just ask it what it needs from you in order to get the best results, it will tell you, feed that in, and then and that's a great approach that you can apply to absolutely anything when you're using these platforms, because by doing that, you're going to give it exactly the information it needs to give you the best result.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mark, that was amazing. Thanks ever so much for calling in there.
That's all right. No,
Appreciate
great
that.
show this evening, and thanks to Mark, Alessandro, and Paul, and others who've jumped in and said and shared on it. It's been really interesting. So thanks for putting it together, Tom. Cheers.
Brilliant. Cheers. Yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating. So a huge thanks to Mark Wilson who's joined us tonight, Alessandro Leone who's joined us tonight, Mark who's just joined us, and of course Paul Williams as well. It's been a really fascinating show. I mean, again, this is probably something I'll revisit maybe, and because I think Mark just mentioned that the pace of change is going to be so much that actually in 4 to 6 months' time, it'll probably be another sort of, here's the latest amalgamation. What do we think of it? How have we used it? What do we make of it? I think one of the best things about tonight is hearing from teachers as well who are using it, the likes of Alessandro, the likes of Mark, to hear how they're actually using it in the classroom. Big thanks to everybody for listening along tonight on Teachers Talk Radio. If you want a bit more TTR, our amazing host Ray, who is absolutely fantastic, is over on Teachers Talk Radio on the website right now. She's live, and she's talking about independent learning and how difficult that is, how easy it is to say, but how difficult it is to actually achieve. That's live on the TTR website. You can just click listen live on the top bar to listen to that now on the website. So that's something to listen to now. Of course, this and any other show that you hear on TTR will be available as a podcast. Just follow us wherever you get your podcasts from, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is. Give us a follow, subscribe, give us a review if you sort of like what you hear. That would be obviously much appreciated as well. We really, really appreciate everybody listening, and especially as we achieved 1 million downloads, which was really exciting and something that, well, certainly I didn't expect us to achieve. So that's amazing. So thanks very much for listening, everybody. And yeah, I'll be back after Christmas now. This was my last hurrah before Christmas. So just to wish everybody a good break. I hope you rest up. And I'll be back on the Monday after New Year. The second Monday after New Year with another show. So thanks very much for listening, and speak again soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from